We know that in business, creating systems that can run the business is critical to success, but often the word systems can send us into overwhelm. But there is hope. Business coach Phil Badura shares with us today the system around creating systems in your business and how systems run the business and people run the systems. You're going to love the tips he shares. Phil, I'm really excited to talk to you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Michelle.
Phil, tell me, why did you become a business coach?
Oh, I've had a very, very interesting journey in my career. So I started out in the food industry and working in senior management roles in a lot of the major food companies right around Australia, and also a little bit in Papua New Guinea. And anyway, I came to the point where I always felt that somebody else was in control of my destiny. So I decided that I was going to take the leap of faith, and we started up a boating business in Nelson Bay, which was just north of Newcastle. And we had that for 3 years, but unfortunately the GFC hit, and the marine industry was the hardest hit industry in Australia during the GFC. So unfortunately we had to shut that business down. So I then sold myself back as a personal brand into the food industry, doing fixed-term contract periods, which meant that I was living away from home a lot. So I got to the point after about 5 or 6 years and decided, no, I need something that's I can do that keeps me at home. And so I was looking at a number of different franchises, came across the ActionCOACH franchise, and decided that their systems, the toolbox, and my experience was a great fit. And so on the Christmas Eve of 2013, I made the decision, without knowing very much about ActionCOACH at all, launched into it, and I found myself in Las Vegas at the end of January, starting 10 days of the most amazing and overwhelming training that I've ever attended. Very early starts and late finishes. So that's how I came to join ActionCOACH back in 2006.
Thank you for sharing that, Phil. So you said that, your background really aligned with, business coaching. What do you love the most about what you get to do every day with business owners?
Well, one of the things, and I've reflected on this often, is back in my corporate days, one of the, I guess the things that I used to pride myself on was my direct reports. So, and I didn't realize this until I joined ActionCOACH, but one of the things I enjoyed most was coaching them, not only to be better managers in the business, but also coach them how to enjoy their personal lives a lot more as well. And it took me some time to actually make that connection. And one of my biggest fears coming into business coaching, small business owners as opposed to large corporates, was what can I teach a small business owner? And that was one of my biggest fears. And what I found was that business owners, the smaller business owners, were very, very good at either their trade or their profession. But when it actually came to running the business, that's where I found that my experience, because I was at senior management and worked across all facets of a business, that I was able to bring my experience in, share it with them, and help guide them into what they could be implementing as best practice in their own businesses. So that's where I guess I really ticked my boxes and gave me a great buzz internally.
Awesome. And Phil, you get to, talk with hundreds of business owners, and I'm sure thousands over the 10 plus years that you've been a business coach now. What do you find is the most common challenge that business owners face out there from those that you've spoken to?
Great question, Michelle. And I guess the answer to that is that there's lots of common challenges. But the ones that I seem to find are the most pressing ones are things like, I'm too busy fighting fires. I haven't got time to do this and I haven't got time to do that. And so that's probably the number one challenge. The next challenge is I can't find or recruit or retain great team members. And then the third one probably comes back to cash flow, or I'm not achieving the profits that I believe that I should be making. And so when when I start working with a client, these are the areas that we start to delve into. And for each business, it's a very, very different point, particularly where I start. I start with, what's your most pressing challenge right now? Let's get that fixed so that we can then identify where the other challenges are.
Okay, great. So is there a common area that you find that is that starting point for most of the business?
Not really. So one of the first steps that I do is when I'm working with my clients, we start out with what I call the alignment process. And this is where we're looking at their personal goals and their business goals. And, and this happens with just about every client that I have is, wow, I have never been through that sort of process before. And one of the things that I find is that by doing the alignment process, what I find is a lot of business owners and even people in general don't give themselves permission to dream. And, this is part of our formula for success is the dreams times goals, times learning, times plans, times actions is what creates success. And because they haven't given themselves permission to dream, and this is what we take them through in that alignment process, it then sets the roadmap for what the bigger things are in what they want to achieve in their business. It helps identify where the challenges are. So, I'm thinking of, one client that really had that too busy fighting fires. And when we really delved down into it, what we found was that and what I like to do is get to the core reason. What's the core of why are you fighting so many fires on a daily basis? And a lot of it came down to what I call systems. And in that particular case, it was they didn't have the right standard operating procedures, or what I call SOPs, in place. So their team was out doing their daily work and they were just going along their merry way, doing things the way that they thought it should be done. So one of the first things we did was to implement some procedures, proper standard operating procedures around the things that he was finding that he was putting out the most fires on. And it was things like, not doing up a nut properly or tightening it up after they'd fitted it. So this was a plumber, and not checking that the work that they were doing was actually complete. So by putting in those systems, those SOPs, we were able to quickly turn that around so that, A, the mistakes weren't being made, which meant that the rework cut right back. And thirdly, because of that, started to make more profit in the business. So that was one example. Another client was really struggling, needed good people, particularly through that COVID period where some businesses and some industries actually took off, was having difficulty finding the right people. And so the thing that we worked on with that client was to actually implement a recruiting process. right from the position, identifying what the position was that they needed. What's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? And when we really looked at the shortcuts that they were taking with the recruitment process, they ended up, or before we implemented the whole system, was, you're a pair of arms and legs. Yep, you'll be right. Come into the business. And then they wondered why they weren't working out and why they couldn't keep them. So once we started to go through the proper interview processes, doing things like disc profiles, we were able to turn that business around so that the team members started to stay longer and I guess were more complementary to what the business owner was looking for.
In the long term, not just short term.
Absolutely.
So systems, explain to me, and I'm also talking about myself here right now, why does the word systems often put cold chills down the spine of business owners?
It's another great question, Michelle, because, and well, look, what I put it down to, coming out of the corporate world and working with large teams that reported to me, if I didn't have the right systems in place, chaos would reign. So the way I view systems actually bring you back into control. And the systems, I'm a very, very big fan of Michael Gerber's E-Myth book, where he defines systems run the business, people run the systems. And, to me, that brings the clarity around why systems are so important. Why do business owners fear systems? And because I think a lot of the time they get too bogged down in, there's a lot of work required to implement a system. And once I implement it, my team are not going to follow it anyway. So it's a bit of a mindset thing. The reality is that when you don't have to implement the system yourself as a business owner. This is where you can delegate your team. Sometimes it might be relevant to bring in a third party to implement that system. Once it's implemented, it then comes back to, I guess, the culture in the business. And again, culture is another system. The culture in the business where people actually are happy to follow the system, not go off and do their own thing. And it's, another aspect that I've worked with a lot of my clients with is introducing what I call the counselling system. Now, most business owners would think about, well, if I'm going to counsel somebody, they go in with the mindset that, hey, you've really ticked me off, I'm mad at you, and it's a rather negative mindset. Whereas what I teach them to do is to go in with a positive mindset, with the mindset of, I'm going to improve this team member's performance. And by just having that switch in the mindset, it brings about a very, very different conversation. And the conversation is, okay, yes, you've created an issue for me. This is the issue that I have. Is there any reason why it's happening? And then we've got a bit of a spiel that we go through to identify, stop that issue from happening again. Now, my experience here has been that in, let's say 70 to 80% of the cases, once you raise the issue with the team member, it goes away because they haven't identified they're actually ticking you off. In sort of 10 to 15% of the time, the team member, you might have to have that next formal discussion. And then the other 5% of the time, I could count on less than two hands the amount of times I've actually had to terminate somebody because they've realised that they've either not going to improve, so they leave. So again, it's a win-win situation. And then when you do have to terminate somebody, I've actually had people come back to me and thank me for doing it because they hadn't realised just how bad they might have been in the workplace. So having those formal discussions, communication is another big part of systems as well. Yeah, having those systems around it.
Okay, so I want you to explain to me, because you've said how important systems are for a business, and most business owners know that. So, when you are that business owner and you are feeling that kind of chaos that's arising, it's a bit like whack-a-mole and you're constantly putting out fires and challenges in your business every day. What's the first step to creating a system to help solve that?
The very first step has got to be recognition and identifying that a problem exists. So once you've identified what the problem is, going down to the root cause of the problem, and then working out how are you going to resolve it so that you can prevent it from actually happening again. One of the things that I've created is an audit checklist, which I give to my clients early in the piece. And, this is their opportunity to go through and give themselves a rating of whatever the system item would be. And in some cases, it might not be applicable. But it's in place, it's going well. It's in place, but we need to go back and review it, or we don't have a system in place for that. Then they can check that box. And then once we go through the audit checklist, is then start to prioritise what are the most important ones to be implementing that will give the quickest return.
So what would some of the categories be that you would score in those areas?
Great question. So a lot about the operations of a business, a lot about the financial side of the business. Have they got the right financial systems in place? And that could be, purely from monthly accounting to have they got their pricing, costings system working well and in the right format. I had an example where one of my clients, we couldn't work out why he wasn't making the profit that he thought that he should have been making. And then when we delved into his costing system, where he thought that, and he was working in cubic meters, where he thought that 1 hour equaled 1 cubic meter for the work that his team was doing, when we really dived into it, it was really only 0.5 of a cubic meter. So where he thought his hourly rate was covering the cost for that cubic meter, in fact, it was only half the cost.
Wow, that's a big
one.
Made
a big difference to the business's profitability. And it was an error in his costing system.
Wow, but if he wasn't prompted to really look into that, he would have continued on the same way. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Other areas are things like, how does the receptionist answer the phone? We go down into a lot of detail in just about every aspect of running a business.
Okay. So step 1 is identify the root cause, the problem.
Yep.
Step 2.
Step 2 is then confirm that that is the root cause of the problem. And, go in with an open mind and be prepared that, okay, maybe something myself as a business owner that I've actually contributing to this. Sometimes that can be one of the hardest things to...
Sometimes or often?
Oh, you're being too kind. And so then the next step is to, okay, well, how are we going to resolve this problem? And, so for me, one of the easiest ways is either to take lots of pictures or even videos of how to do that task the right way. So a picture tells 1,000 words, video tells even more words, and then using one-liners in a Word document, different for video, so you can do all of this in the video, but if it's a Word document, picture, one-liner, maybe with some arrows to highlight specific things, then put it into some sort of laminate it or bind it, depending how many pages are in it. And then that becomes your system.
Okay, so what you're talking about is an SOP. So the SOP, is there any, because that kind of sends me into a bit of anxiety to create an SOP for these things that I need to fix. I understand it's important, but that sounds like a lot of work. Am I the one that has to do that, or is there some sort of tool? Like, is there any AI or any software that you would recommend that business owners could use to help with this?
Look, the simplest way is to get the team member themselves to actually do it. So delegate it to the team member. And what's important by doing that is that there then becomes a degree of ownership, right? I created this SOP. I better make sure that I'm following it. And if it's created by team members, the other team members are more likely to embrace that system as well.
I love that.
So, yeah, the other area where all of this comes together is in the company policies and procedures. Mm-hmm. And this, again, the policies and procedures, business owners need to spend a lot of time on that for clarity, so that they're, I guess, using the analogy of a football team, those policies and procedures become the rules on the ground. If they step outside the boundaries of the ground, of the rules of the game, then they need to know what the consequences are as well.
Okay, so I can really see how having SOPs in your business can also help with training new team members, right? So that just becomes a much easier step and process for training.
Absolutely. And, coming back to systems run the business, people run the systems. So those SOPs, your company policy and procedures manual, and any of those other systems-related things all become your training ground. So, when you're onboarding a new team member, these are the tools that you actually use to help bring them up to speed quickly within their new environment.
Brilliant. Okay. So let's say we've done the SOPs. Then what's the next step? Is that training?
Absolutely. So once you implement a new standard operating procedure or it doesn't matter, any new system, then the whole team, if it's relevant to their role within the business, the whole team must then be trained on it. And it's important to sign off on that training as well. Purely from a due diligence perspective, if there was an incident in the workplace, that everybody is actually covered. So train everybody. It's then roll that system out, and I guess the manager's role then becomes they're accountable to hold the team members accountable to make sure that the right systems are being followed all of the time.
Okay, and then it becomes that the fifth step's really that accountability, holding the team accountable to following the systems.
And then the sixth step is review. So it's important to review your systems on a regular basis, and I'd recommend 6 monthly to annually, depending on the importance of the role and how much might have changed. So review the system and then update those systems on that regular basis, because if you're not updating, then again, that's where the mistakes will start to creep in, the rework will be happening, callbacks. So all of those things that you initially went into place to fix in the first place, if you're not staying on top of them, they'll come back and cause you more grief down the track. So review, review, and review.
That's brilliant. I mean, lots of kind of light bulb moments for me. I love the step process that you've given me for creating systems in the business. One of the things that I wanted to kind of ask you about is really the importance. What I'm seeing from what you're sharing is that systems place on the overall success of a business, whether it's, like you mentioned, workplace health and safety. They may be wanting to go for a bank loan to scale their business, to, raise capital, whatever it might be. It's almost like that linchpin between the small business and then the growth of that business for the future, where they want to go with those goals and dreams, right?
I couldn't agree more, Michelle. And look, the more you can demonstrate systems, even those business plans. If I look back and at the clients that I've worked with, the most successful ones have been the ones that have had, from that alignment process, that clear roadmap, followed up by completing their 90-day plans every quarter. Because it's been those 90-day plans that, I guess, keep them on track with what they're focused on and trying to achieve. And, from that comes those business plans that then become really important for, if you're ready to scale your business, do you need funding? If you need funding, you need a business plan for whoever the funder might be, whether it's a bank or an investor. All of these things become really important. And when you can demonstrate that you've got those systems in place, you've got those business plans in place, then that sets you on the path to scaling as quickly as you would like it to scale.
Brilliant. So what I've taken out of this is, as much as I feel like it's a massive job to create systems in the business, the way that you've given me that simple step process to create the system. So identify the problem, the root cause, confirm that is correct. So clarify. Number 3 is create the SOP. Number 4 is train the team. 5 is accountability, hold everyone accountable to following the systems. And 6 is review, to check in every 6 to 12 months on those systems and check they're still current.
Yep. Absolutely.
Brilliant. You've just made systems so much easier for me, Phil. Thank you.
Well, the system is a system, isn't it?
There's a system for the system. I love it. Unreal. So, Phil, just to finish up, I would love to just ask you 3 fire questions. Question number 1 is, what's your favourite business book that you can share?
Well, as a self-proclaimed procrastinator, one of the most what's the word I'm looking for? The book that has appealed to me most is Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. And by understanding what are the things that you're procrastinating on, what are the things that you know that you should be doing, and that if you did do them would take you a step forward, that for me has been one of the best books. As a procrastinator, I like to have, let me reframe my words. I used to dot every I, cross every T multiple times before I would get started. And so my coach, Bruce Wilson, long ago he said to me, and I would take this as being the best bit of advice that I've ever received, is, Phil, stop it, just get started. And the meaning behind that is nothing happens until you actually get some momentum. It's taking that first step. And so thank you, Bruce. That was some of the best advice you've ever given me.
I'm sure he didn't say it to you that nicely, but we get the point.
I think there was an element of frustration on his behalf in me not doing the things or getting started at the time?
Yeah, I mean, look, these questions at the end are really meant to kind of be fast, but I really want to dive into that, because procrastination, I mean, that even just procrastinating around putting systems in place is something that can often hold you back. So I love that. Thank you for sharing the frog concept, which is obviously a system for procrastinating.
Absolutely. And, that's what another thing that I get my clients to do is every day, is to fill in their to-do list, what we call the frog list, in the last 5 minutes before they go home every day. So it's doing tomorrow's to-do list today.
I practice that, and I tell you, you can just say your day can easily get hijacked. And if it wasn't for that frog sheet, that list that I have that I prepared the night before, I just would go way off track. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that's going to be of massive value for business owners that are listening and their teams. Second question, Phil, who's been the best mentor or coach for you throughout your career?
Again, I'm going to come back to Bruce, because Bruce has helped work with me on my mindset. And by working on my mindset, that's been enabled me to help work on the mindset of my business owners, particularly around their business mindset, and helping them to identify what are the things that are important, what do I need to be applying my focus, attention, and energy into in doing what I call the right things in their business.
Does that sound like a system?
It is all part of a system.
And Phil, what's the best piece of business advice that you've ever received? I think you pretty much covered that in question one, didn't you?
Definitely just get started.
Get started. Love it.
Nothing happens until momentum happens. And
thank you, Phil. I really appreciate your time and the strategies that you've shared, the system around creating systems for your business. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for inviting me to participate.
Michelle Adams, your host here. Hats off to you for committing to your learning by listening to this podcast. And if you'd like some help implementing some of these strategies, then click the link in the description to find your local action coach. They can help you put these strategies into action and take your business and your life to the next level. In the meantime, like and subscribe so that you're the first to get our next episode. We'll see you soon.